Welcome to the Ditch the Struggle podcast. I'm your host, Alana Rosso. I'm a graphic designer turned career and success coach who knew I could do better, but kept falling short of where I wanted to go. But after years of exploring personal and career development, business, money mindset, and energy work, I'm here to tell you that yes, you can move from stuck and defeated to empowered and confident. Ready to dive in? Awesome. Together, let's ditch the struggle. Hi, everyone. We have an interview today with Sara McCready. She is a mentor, she is a coach, and we dive into a conversation about everything from toxic relationships to rebuilding your nervous system and staying calm under all circumstances. It's a great conversation. So let me give you her little bio. Sara McCready is the founder of Illuminated Joy and is a renowned mentor for high-achieving and intuitive corporate women, specializing in teaching them how to achieve emotional mastery. As a women's emotional mastery coach, Sara empowers women to overcome triggers, build confidence, and feel powerful, guiding them to become unstoppable in mind, body, and soul through her personalized one-to-one mentorship programs. Sara's unique approach is rooted in her own journey of transformation, having turned her breakdowns into breakthroughs. Her mentorship combines spiritual, metaphysical, and trauma-informed techniques, creating a holistic path back to joy for her clients. Having survived and thrived after 4 emotionally abusive relationships, Sara teaches women how to create emotional safety within their bodies through nervous system regulation and resiliency building techniques. Sara's mission is to teach and inspire powerful women to learn the true meaning of peace, joy, and centeredness in their daily lives. Recognized for her impactful work, Sara was awarded Best Life Coach 2024 in Brantford, Ontario by Quality Business Awards. She's an incredible person to talk to. Let's dive into the conversation. Welcome, Sara. I am thrilled to have you on the show. We have been talking about chatting for a while, and we finally made it happen today.
Absolutely. I am super thrilled to see what is going to percolate in this conversation for us today.
We always have good conversations. We've known each other for 2 or 3 years now.
Something like that. It's been a while. Yeah.
And we met in a theta healing class, actually, and we could not stop talking over Zoom with each other.
That's right. Yeah. It was definitely a divinely designed meeting and divinely timed meeting.
Yeah, I think we almost got in trouble by the instructor for talking too much at the end.
Well, we weren't really doing what we were supposed to be doing.
No, we weren't. We were definitely doing some rebellious activity.
We went off-roading. Yeah.
We did. Okay. So why don't you just give us a little bit of a backstory, because you've been doing some really incredible work.
Yeah. I'm super excited to talk with your audience today and share what it is that I do in the world in hopes that there will be something that resonates with someone, even if it's just one person. And that is really the reason why I do what I do today. So my name is Sara McCready. My business name is Illuminated Joy, and I'm an intuitive mentor and a women's empowerment leader. And I work with women who have experienced a toxic relationship, whether that's through work, through immediate family, or through romantic, intimate partner, spouse marriage. And I help women move through the trauma, drama, and chaos of those relationship dynamics so that they can experience peace, ease, clarity, joy, and grace in their lives again. And it's through mentorship, one-on-one mentorship, that I work with women exclusively. And it is because I have experienced that type of relationship on 4 separate occasions over a 25-year period of my life. And it was the 4th and final toxic relationship that allowed me to have my breakdown for my breakthrough. It was absolutely the dark night of the soul. And it was through moving that mountain and coming out on top and discovering everything that I have about toxic relationship dynamics, codependency, and unworthiness, and how those are driving our attractions and reactions without us even realizing it. and overcoming those behaviors and those thoughts and feelings and emotions to be fully empowered, to be in a place of ease and peace, and to experience the fullness of life.
4 relationships, and that 4th one was the one where you had what you call the breakdown to the breakthrough, which I love that phrase because it does require hitting that rock bottom, getting down on the floor sometimes. Just what was the moment where you realized that you were definitely in a toxic relationship?
Oh, well, that was part of the journey and part of the story. And part of why I do what I do today is because I didn't know that I was in a toxic relationship. When I talk about a breakdown, I'm talking about all fronts. So mentally, physically, and emotionally, I had completely broken down. And I removed myself from the matrimonial home, as I call it, and the relationship because I was physically ill. And I knew that at that point, all I knew was that I needed to look after myself or I wasn't going to be here any longer. And it was through the process of trying to rebuild my physical body and figure out why emotionally I was so undone that I began to learn about a toxic relationship dynamic and what that really was. And in my case, when I'm talking about toxic relationship, I'm talking about narcissistic abuse, so mental and emotional abuse. And I didn't know what mental and emotional abuse was, and that the experience that I was having was a byproduct of mental and emotional abuse. And so that was the driver when I began to understand that, which was 9 months after I left, before I stumbled on the word narcissism. And then from there, it was just a super deep dive. I started reading absolutely everything I could, videos, books, all the other coaches that are out there, just learning absolutely everything I could and starting to piece together what my experience had been in this relationship, but also in the previous 3 relationships.
So when you saw that there was that it had happened across all 4 relationships, how was that to process?
Mm, yeah, that's probably shortly after I met you was when I began processing that. And which was why I had started taking theta healing, doing those courses. I was looking for ways to help support process those emotions because they are like nothing you've ever experienced before. You look the same on the outside, but on the inside, nothing is the same. Your brain doesn't work the same. Your body doesn't function the same. Quite often, as a result of mental and emotional abuse, you can have physical ailments like autoimmune can kick in, dis-ease, as we call it. So you're having, dis-ease in your body. You're not easy in your body. You're not easy in your mind. You're not easy in your heart. So that can manifest into other physical ailments. And it was through trying to support myself because no one else knew how to support me that I was able to begin processing some of those big emotions and recognizing that through the energetic body, through energy healing, energy clearing, understanding the connection between the energetic body and the physical body and the emotional body, that I was releasing trauma from, yes, that 4th and final toxic relationship, but also the previous 3. And so it was a journey and continues to be a journey. It will always be a journey, but a particularly dense journey in that moment because it was a lifetime of healing that I was doing. It wasn't just from that one or that 4th particular experience. It was a lifetime. So, to answer your question, yeah, like really really looking for ways to support myself beyond anything I had ever done before. I had gone to counseling before, and it helped somewhat. It like gave a sense of release, or relief, I should say, but it didn't allow for a full release.
Yeah, because it can provide the awareness, but then you have to move deeper into the releasing, as you said, of the trauma that has been built up over, you're right, not just those 4 relationships, but the trauma that led you to get into those relationships,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is the really, from the beginning, which is the really hard stuff to unpack.
Yeah. Yeah. When you begin to connect the dots and you recognize that it wasn't just one particular relationship, that it was probably all of your relationships up until that point of awareness, it is, I want to say, devastating on one hand, but on the other hand, it's also like everything starts making so much more sense. You begin to have an understanding of why you were attracted to the type of people you were attracted to, why you kept having the same experiences over and over again, and how to begin to reconcile those past experiences with where you want to go moving forward. And so I think one of the biggest things for me was recognizing that I actually was the common denominator in all of those relationships. It was easy to point the finger at the other person for, each and every one of those relationships, because there was addiction involved and other unhealthy behaviors and habits. And so I could say, oh, it's them, not me. But what came out of the real healing, when it really started to get deep, was the understanding that I was also in each of those relationships, and I also had a part to play. And then that is when the real healing began, is having the recognition that I was part of that too.
And that is a heavy one to accept, because have you heard that phrase? If every bar you go into, a bar fight breaks out, then maybe you need to look at yourself, or so. That kind of idea is like, there is a role that we play in all of these things that happen. And it is not our fault by any means, but we're playing a role. And to realize that, our participation in this scenario or these relationships is perpetuating the trauma is very hard to digest at times.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was a big pill to swallow. As I say, you could have blown me over with a feather when I made that connection about myself that day. But it also is the key to begin to unlock what the behaviors have been up to that point, so that you can begin to step into the new behaviors. You can't change, nothing changes if nothing changes. And until you recognize the patterns that you've been repeating, you can't change them. And so that's why I said, on one hand, it was devastating. And on another hand, it was so liberating and clarifying, because then I could truly begin to make changes in my thoughts, in what it was that I wanted in life, how I was showing up, and how I was representing myself, essentially.
For everyone listening, how would you define a toxic relationship? Because your story is very interesting. It's an incredible story and an incredible journey. But I want people to really understand what a toxic relationship is, because I think sometimes they hide in plain sight. And we're not just talking about romantic relationships either. We're talking about friendships, work relationships, all of it. So what is a toxic relationship?
Yeah. So I like to define a toxic relationship as a relationship, as you said, whether it is intimate and romantic or with immediate family or friends. I'll address work separately. But the toxic relationship dynamic is one where you find that you are giving more than you're receiving, and it doesn't feel good. There is a point in time in the relationship, whether it's a couple of months, a couple of years, or a lifetime if it's family, where you begin to notice that there is not a sense of reciprocation or reciprocity, that there is definitely a one-sided slant, and that it's you giving more than you're receiving. The other definition that I use is particularly in romantic and intimate relationship is watching the behaviors and the words. So the actions and the words, are they aligning? Quite often when we're in these relationships, and this can be said of family dynamics and friendship dynamics as well, when we're in these relationships, and as you said, they're kind of hiding in plain sight, we're not aware that we're in an emotionally unhealthy relationship. What is happening is we're listening to what's being said. So the sweet nothings that are being said to us, or the promises that are being made to us, or the outright lies that are being told to us. And we're listening to those, but we're not watching the actions that follow. So for instance, in that fourth and final relationship, we were married. And towards the end, when it became clear that things weren't, well, right, but I didn't know why, I was trying to engage in conversation and communication to reach a resolution. And I was always being told, yes, we're partners. Yes, we're married. Yes, we're in this together. That phrase was on repeat all the time. And I heard it and it would appease me. And I would be like, okay, yeah, we got this. We're going to do it. What I wasn't cognizant of was that the exact opposite actions were being taken. So verbally, there was a yes, we're partners, we're married, we're in this together. But then the actions were never home, not supporting, not participating, and not being available for a conversation. So that's essentially my definition, is when the words and actions are not aligning, and recognizing that these are patterns of behavior that have to be acknowledged.
I think this is so powerful, because if you can start to see the awareness of that disconnect between what they're saying and what they're doing. I mean, it's really quite simple. When you say it like that, it's so articulately as well. It's so simple, and yet it is so, so powerful.
Yeah. Yeah. When I pieced that together, I actually went back through some of the message exchanges that we had once I understood what was occurring, and that we weren't in it together, and we weren't in it to win it together. When I understood finally that it was a one-sided relationship, I went back and looked at the messages with a very different perspective. And I could see how all the words were the words that I needed to hear in that moment to, look over there to divert my attention, so that I wasn't actually seeing the actions.
Yeah. You're just getting told what you wanted to hear, placated, and told that everything was going to be okay. And it's easy to believe the words because we want to believe the words. We want to believe the best in people. And that is also another hard pill to swallow, when people are not going to be able to show up or be the person we want them to be.
Yeah. And the other part of that as well is not shaming and blaming yourself. When you recognize what's happened, it's really about taking self-responsibility and taking action to look after yourself. And so now that I know what I know, it does seem simplified, and it does seem so blatantly obvious. But when you're in it, you cannot see the forest for the trees. However, having the awareness that I just shared, which is you have to start matching the words and the actions and watching to see if they align. And if they don't, that is your answer. You need to watch the action. And when you start employing that methodology, if you will, then you're able to take decisive action on any relationship dynamic. And particularly when you recognize that the actions are completely different and you're the one that is overgiving or overextending or, providing more than the other person, then it really is time to look in the mirror rather than continuing to look at the other person for a resolution because it's not coming.
No, and I love that you just clarified the difference between taking personal responsibility and blaming and shaming ourselves, because it's very easy to beat ourselves up about the decisions we made, the choices we made. That's not helpful, but also we're in it, as you said, in that forest. We can't see it, and we make the best decisions we can at the time.
Yeah, that self-forgiveness piece is huge. And that comes after you have sifted and sorted and given yourself some space and time. As I was saying earlier, quite often when you're in the thick of it, there is a lot happening mentally and emotionally, and you really don't have clarity of thought. There is such a cortisol haze, as I call it, or fog going on in your brain because you are under constant stress. And so you're living in elevated levels of cortisol, which means you're in fight, flight, or freeze more often than you're not, which also equates to having a dysregulated nervous system. And when you're living in a state of dysregulation more often than not, you do not actually have full cognitive functioning. You don't have all of your faculties available to you to use to make decisions.
100%. I think the dysregulation piece, I really want to just talk about that for a second, because it kind of creeps up on us, that cortisol spike and kind of living in fight or flight. And then we get used to it. And then we don't realize that we're actually not functioning if we're in a relationship like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. One of the reasons why I pulled myself out, or as I often share, I know I was being guided out of that fourth and final toxic relationship. I had been working in an office, and one of my superpowers is my memory. And so when you're in a corporate environment and you have a really strong memory, it's actually kind of a fun tool to have because you don't have to spend a lot of time looking for files or going through documents because you literally have it at your fingertips or at, the front of your brain. And so it helps you actually produce a lot of work a lot more quickly. And what was happening was that I would get to the office and I couldn't remember if I'd brushed my teeth or put deodorant on. And so to compensate, I started leaving a toothbrush and toothpaste and deodorant in the desk drawer.
Wow.
And then if that wasn't enough compensation, I realized one day that I didn't remember what had happened that morning. It was sometime after lunch and I was sitting at my desk and I literally could not remember what I had done that morning in the office for work. It was a complete blank. And so having the superpower of memory and being rewarded for having a good memory and then suddenly seeing in very real terms that my memory was not there, was terrifying. And that was really the beginning of what is happening here. Something's wrong.
Yeah, how terrifying was that? I mean, to really just have that superpower suddenly vanish.
Yeah. Yeah. That is when I became probably even more dysregulated and wondering what was happening to me physically.
Mm-hmm.
Was I losing my mind? Was there something hormonally happening to my body that I wasn't aware of? I was experiencing physical pain, particularly in my lungs. As we now know, anyone who has done the deep dive into traditional Chinese medicine or spirituality, the chakra system, we know that the emotion of grief is stored in the lungs.
Yes.
But I didn't know that at the time. So, coupled with memory loss, extreme fatigue, and this weird physical pain in my lungs, I was in fear more than anything.
Yeah.
And when you move into fear, you actually become paralyzed. So I wasn't able to take action. I think I went to the doctors, and of course, they didn't find anything wrong with me because, by traditional medical tests, there wasn't anything wrong. And so you really become immobilized at that point.
Immobilized. That is a perfect word. It's that freeze, but extreme, that freeze mode, but extreme. I remember when my mom was dying in 2021 and I was spending every day at the hospital. She actually was also a narcissist. So there's a complicated layer there. I haven't talked much about that, but that'll come out in some episodes. And I was obviously super stressed, running on cortisol. And I went to get into my car one day and I turn on the ignition and I went to turn on the lights and I had no idea how to turn the lights on in my car that I have been driving for 7, 8 years. Like I could not figure out what button to push or pull to turn on the headlights. There was such a wave of panic over me. Like it was just, how can I forget this? And then there was a few other moments. And then I realized that it was extreme brain fog. But of course, I was having this. It was the trauma of the event, and our bodies will shut down and do the weirdest things to protect us in those moments and those processes of trauma.
Yeah. When it's time to deal.
Yeah.
Your body will make you deal.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And in my case, that happened in each of the 4 relationships. I became so physically unwell that I needed to eject myself. I was really being ejected from each of those relationships. And that's why I call it divine intervention, because I would get to the point where I was either going to leave to save myself or there wasn't going to be a me left.
And how were you divinely guided? I'm very curious.
So in each of the, towards the end, after a period of escalation, and by that I would mean, fighting, strange experiences started happening. I would start having dreams. And in my dreams, I was being given information intuitively about basically where my partners had been and what they were doing.
Wow.
So foreshadowing. Yeah. And really the point would come where I would just make a decision. And although it seemed like it was me making the decision, it really wasn't. It was an accumulation of, typically in each case, it would have been a year of escalating behavior. And at the end of a year, I'd maxed out on all the things and would have to leave the place that we were living in. So I was usually moving myself out.
Right.
Yeah. And it wasn't always a direct message from spirit or source. It was just a deep knowing that today you have to leave now.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I've had that feeling where it's just like, I've got to do this now, whatever it is. And I have friends who are like that too, where they just know, like certain times you've just got to do what you've got to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, how did your healing process really begin to unfold? You had the awareness, you got out, you made the moves. You obviously did all the research and went down those rabbit holes, but what was the real catalyst for your healing?
Yeah. For me, it was energy healing.
Okay.
So before I even had the awareness that I was had experienced narcissistic abuse, it was like I was describing, that brain fog and the physical pain that had led me to energy healing. So I was receiving energy healing on a regular basis. And it was through the energy healing experiences that my nervous system began to regulate, and that my, as I call it, my psychic centers began to open up. Now, had they already been in play? Yes, that's kind of a question that I get asked most frequently was, well, you must have been having intuitive information before that fourth and final toxic relationship. And yes, absolutely. Over the years, there's been lots of wild and fun experiences where there's been direct messages, there's been guidance, there's been intuitive nudges and hints. But what happened through receiving the energy healing was a full awakening or a full opening. And then it became a curiosity. It was something that I wanted to know more and more about. And how could I use the knowledge and the wisdom of thousands of years to help me move through this experience and to create that peace and ease in my mind and in my body so that I was not continuing to be in suffering. And then, as I said at the top of this conversation, when I started tying all my knowledge of the physical body to the energetic body or the spiritual body, it just became like I had to share it with the world. Like, everybody needs to know about this. Why isn't anybody else talking about this? Why doesn't everybody know about this? It became one of those, like, I had to share what I learned type of scenarios. And it was through the spiritual awakening, if you want to call it that, or the spiritual awareness, that true peace and mindfulness and centeredness and balance became my state and way of being. And when you get regulated and when you get centered and when you choose peace above all else, and that did become a mantra of mine at the, the 10 or 11-month mark out of that toxic relationship number 4, I choose peace became my mantra. And I said that every day for a year. And I said it many, many times a day for over a year. And it literally, when you choose peace and you're choosing the energy and the frequency of peace, it changes your state of mind. It changes your neural pathways. It changes your brain activity. And so what I was being attracted to, meaning energetically pulled towards, was anything and everything that was peace and ease and serenity.
Right. And I would say peace is the exact 180 of struggle. Like, if I was to think about it, so what, like, which is what I love. So I choose peace is basically the perfect way to ditch the struggle. Yeah. Why do you think, and I have my own thoughts on this, but why do you think people choose not to choose peace?
That's such a great question. This is actually a topic that we do the deep dive in with my client. And it's not revealed in that way. So they don't recognize, and this goes for all of us, we don't recognize that we're in suffering. And we don't recognize that we have a choice. And we don't recognize that we are spirit having a human experience, and it's the human that chooses to continue to struggle. And until there is some sort of awareness, shift in perspective, bigger picture view, we continue to stay in struggle because that is what is modeled for us more than choosing peace.
Yeah, and I think we live in a world where struggle is celebrated. It is the norm for a lot of people. And there's a range, there's like a spectrum of struggle, right?
Yeah.
And I know for me, having grown up with the conflict, the combat, which is the way I kind of think about it, even though it was more just chaos, like I was so used to that. And I was used to having a dysregulated nervous system. And I would still say that my nervous system likes to default to dysregulation. I know we text all the time about how our nervous systems are doing. And especially in the last year, we've both done more of a dive into that work.
Yeah.
And I have to consciously recognize when I'm feeling regulated, and I'll be like, oh, this is actually the place I want to be in.
That's right.
And I need to stay in this.
Feels good.
Yes, this is actually good, even though it's foreign at times. And, I've had tons of projects the last couple of weeks. So I found myself getting really dysregulated. And I sat down on the couch one day and I was like, I am not regulated. This is not good. This is like struggle energy coursing through every cell of my body.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're attracted to what's familiar, not what's healthy for us. And that is exactly why I kept going back into the same type of relationship dynamic over and over and over again until I identified the pattern. Yes. I was attracted to the struggle. I was attracted to what felt familiar, and what felt familiar to me was dysregulation.
I think so many of us are dysregulated. And if you can just start tapping into that and regulate and just
we live in a hustle culture. We're always on 24/7 hustle culture.
Yeah.
We can't not be dysregulated. It is a byproduct of the society that we live in today.
Yeah.
I have been giving a keynote this year, which you know of. And one of the things when I was writing the keynote at the beginning of the year, one of the awarenesses that came forward for me on this subject was, and I'm dating myself by sharing this story, was the memory of we used to not have Sunday shopping. When I was a kid,
yes.
When I was a kid and a teenager, there was no Sunday shopping.
Yep.
We had one day of full, intentional quiet, solitude, and a chance to regulate. Mm-hmm. Now, we didn't use that language at the time, but what the result of not having anywhere to go, no one was working, no stores were open, no shopping, no nothing. It was a day off to fully recover. And what that allowed us was a day of rest and repair and recovery. We got to regulate our nervous system, even if it was just one day a week, but we did it one day a week, every month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every week. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So there was a lot more regulation and space and time to do it. With the advent of 24/7, always on, stores are open, there is always somewhere to go, and the growth of the online space, social media, the internet, all of that. There is never any downtime unless you consciously and intentionally choose to give that to yourself.
How important is downtime for your clients and the people that are working through their toxic relationships?
It's everything. It's absolutely everything. We have to learn how to live again, and we learn a new way of living. When you come out of a narcissistic, abusive relationship, mental and emotional abuse, you literally have experienced trauma, no different than someone who has gone off to war. So you have what's known as CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And you are not the same person. Your brain doesn't work the same way. Your body doesn't work the same way. Cellularly, you are completely different. And so rest, repair, and recovery, learning to regulate your nervous system, learning to self-soothe, and learning to take time intentionally and mindfully for yourself every day, not just one day a week, is mandatory to having a healthy mind, body, and soul. You have to carve out time for yourself to begin to repair. And when you don't carve out time for yourself to repair, you are prolonging or perpetuating, as you said, the trauma. And you're continuing to keep yourself in that cycle of suffering and dis-ease.
Yeah. And downtime is not just, a 10-minute sitting down in front of Netflix. Again,
Nope.
and you called me out the other day when we were at an event a couple weeks ago. And, things have been a little chaotic for me. And I brought that on myself. So I put myself into overwork mode. I'm kind of coming out of it. And I was telling you, I was like, but Sarah, I have like really slow mornings. Like I take 2 hours every morning to kind of just get into the day. And you were like,
remember this. Yeah. Yeah.
that is the bare minimum. And I was
That's
like,
right.
damn, you like,
Yeah.
in my head, the way we have such a warped concept of downtime and taking time for ourselves, that 2 hours felt like self-indulgent because, I don't have kids. I can take time in the morning. Yeah. And when you said that's the bare minimum, that really hit home with me. I've been thinking about that since our condo.
I saw that on your face when I said that. Yeah. And I think, if I recall correctly, I think we switched the subject after that.
Probably. I was like, I need to percolate on that one.
That one was, that one landed.
You landed. Yeah.
Yes. Just give me 1 second. There was something you just shared about Netflix. Yes. We don't mean just sitting down for 10 minutes or an hour watching Netflix. Yes. It's not, and this is another thing that I've started sharing regularly. It's not self-care. It is soul care. And by soul care, what I mean is you are deeply repairing and recovering all parts of yourself and your mind, body, and soul, not just taking an hour in the morning or 2 hours, whatever it is. And when we talk about that being the bare minimum, it's because you have the right to have a slow start to the morning. And yes, that allows you to ease into the day and not become dysregulated off the bat. However, continuing to proactively regulate yourself requires more soul care provisions than just the way that you start your morning. Like, so as I had shared with you that day, that's the bare minimum. Like, yes, you're going to have a slow morning because starting the morning off, like hopping out of bed and running to your computer is going to dysregulate you because you've experienced mental and emotional abuse. And because you've lived more dysregulated than not, you are going to be living and operating in a different frame of mind and a different framework. And that means that you're going to be proactively regulating yourself throughout the day. And the way we do that is through mindfulness practices or soul care practices. So taking time to get outside, taking time for movement, doing a yoga practice or some sort of qigong or tai chi or, slow movement practice, making sure that you're having acupuncture or massage or osteopath, any type of what I call body work, in addition to the mindfulness practice, taking time to just breathe, to listen to frequencies or binaural beat, to do a little meditation. Those are all soul care practices, and they are mandatory provisions to maintain a regulated nervous system.
Soul care. Beautiful.
I don't care.
Well, I have been better to my soul since we had that conversation. And I am
Yeah.
actually like addicted to slow mornings. I think I want to do a podcast episode on that because, well, I don't look at my phone at least the first hour of the day anyway, but I've really had to slow my mornings down. And there was a part of me that was um, almost criticizing myself for taking such a long time in the morning. And then I was like,
Hmm.
this is what I need right now. And I'm super productive in the day and it's kind of setting me up. And it's catching yourself in the awareness. It's like, why am I criticizing myself for having this slow morning? Do I have to have a fast morning? Like I've left most of my corporate culture behind because
That's right.
I don't know how I did it. I don't know how I got up, got my hair done, got on an outfit, ran downtown, picked up the
Yeah.
Starbucks, did that whole
Yeah. And then sat at your desk for 8, 9, 10
sat at
hours.
my
Yeah.
desk and then went to spin class and I don't
Yeah.
know how I did it, but my body does not want that right now. And I
No.
have to honor that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that is part of the journey. That's why it's a journey, not a destination.
Mhm.
It's recognizing so back to your why do we stay in suffering? It's recognizing where the paradigm and the stories are trying to dictate what is actually best for us, and recognizing that it's okay to go against the grain and live a slower life when you want to have a regulated nervous system
Mhm.
and when you want to feel peace and ease.
Okay.
It is going to look completely different than it does if you're living in the paradigm of hustle culture.
Yeah. And I now have kind of a bit of a visceral reaction to hustle culture if I'm in somewhere
Totally.
chaotic or if I'm
Yes, you
visiting a
do.
friend who
Yeah, you
is
do.
living a chaotic life.
Yeah.
And I'm over visiting them. Like I
Yeah.
find my body does not like it. I can't handle it. And
Yeah. You feel it.
I feel it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know how I feel it. So
Yeah.
what what would you say to someone who does kind of recognize they're in a toxic relationship? And again, it could be a friendship, romantic, or a work relationship. What are some of their first steps that will help them feel empowered?
Mm. Um, I was just having this conversation the other day, and the very, very, very first step, whether you're inside of a relationship, meaning you're living together, whether it's parents, siblings, friends, and even if it's at work, the very first thing is to create space for yourself. Because as we were talking about, until you get that space, you're going to continue to live in that cortisol haze. There is always going to be something, some drama, some trauma, some chaos. There's always going to be something that's keeping you in the spin cycle. So in order to create the beginning of awareness is to create space. And if you're not if you're in like a partnership, a marriage, and you're not able to leave where you're living, carving out some sort of space within the confines of the four walls that you're living in, or spending more time outside of the home. There has to be that space, because until you give yourself that space, you're not able to begin to have clarity or even see what's actually happening.
Very powerful. Space is one of my core values also. Like it is, I'm obsessed with
I didn't
space.
know that.
Yeah, it's like I need physical
Ah,
space, mental space, calendar space. Like it is true. Like for so many people, and I would just say, especially for myself, if I don't have any kind of window of space, my body physically, emotionally, everything breaks down. My whole life just falls apart. So yeah, if you're in some kind of trauma experience, you have to have that space.
yeah, 100%.
When I left my toxic corporate job, which was in 2021, well, at the end of 2020, I took a 6-week mental health leave or like a short term leave from work
Yeah.
because the situation was so out of control and it got so bad so quickly. Best 6 weeks of my life.
Yeah.
Like it
That's
was
it.
had I not had that space, I could not have gone back to the job. And then I planned the exit because it didn't go well when I got back, but I was mentally prepared for that. I needed that
Right.
6 weeks to process, to heal my body, because I was not sleeping for months and months and months.
Mm,
And then I was able to kind of come up with my plan rationally.
yeah. The fog won't necessarily clear because once you've become dysregulated, your nervous system has become dysregulated and you're in that fight, flight, or freeze more often than not.
Mhm.
Um, the space will not eliminate it, but it will ease it enough for you to be able to start making
Yes.
choices or decisions or a plan.
Yeah.
And yeah, so when you're in a work environment that is toxic, it is important to also recognize at the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about words and actions not aligning as a pattern of behavior and as something to begin to watch for in all of your relationships. That's also to be said for work. So I had shared that, identifying it in the workplace is slightly different because there isn't an intimacy involved. So you don't necessarily feel it as quickly because your emotions aren't as highly, you're not as emotionally involved. It's more, cognitively that you're showing up at work. You're not, your heart isn't so much there. And so it's still the same principles, though. It's still watching to see if there is extreme favoritism going on. If you're being told one thing to your face, but then another thing is happening in actions by either a supervisor or, a lead or whatever, or director, whoever you might be reporting into, if there's a disconnect between what they're telling you and what's actually happening, that is also something to start paying attention to. So then that way you can conduct yourself accordingly. If you're continuing to only listen to the words and then continue to produce and output your work at a really high level, you're continuing to really gaslight yourself about the experience and continue to contribute to the poor treatment that you're receiving. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that you've helped with that distinction because we are not necessarily as involved from the heart with our job, but we're invested and it is still a huge impact on our lives if it's going into a toxic space.
Yeah. Well, we want to do well at our jobs. We've
Yeah.
been taught to,
Yeah.
show up and do a good job. And that's what we're being paid for and rewarded with money by showing up and doing a good job. And so when we're trying and trying and trying, but nothing seems to be working, we look at ourselves first as if we're doing something wrong rather than taking a step back and looking to see if actually the words and actions are aligning from our superiors.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Thank you for that. So I'm going to ask a question I ask all the guests on Ditch the
Mm,
Struggle. So, in the
mm,
spirit of ditching the struggle, what do you feel is most important to commit to?
yeah. We've covered that in this conversation. Um, choosing peace and creating space.
Love that. And
Mandatory.
mandatory. Sara says it's mandatory. You are an expert and you are definitely my go-to person when, yeah, my nervous system gets dysregulated and you call me out on stuff, which I always really appreciate.
And likewise,
Because your intuition is spot on. It's
it's reciprocal.
so
We do that
spot
for
on.
each other.
Yes, and that's a great friend. So, where can people find you to learn more about your mentorship programs, your coaching, and all of the things that you do?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Sara McCready. And then on social media, I'm on all the social media platforms at Illuminated Joy, and we'll have that in the show notes.
Absolutely.
And the website is illuminatedjoy.com. And I have a gift for your listeners, which is a guided audio meditation. So
thank
we'll
you.
have the link for that in the show notes as well.
We will absolutely. And Sara does the most beautiful, potent, guided meditations. You know, I love them. And I could listen to you all day, and they really are powerful. So I encourage everyone, we'll definitely put the link below to download, take a listen, and start that transformation process.
Yay!
Thank you so much, Sara. It's great to have you on today.
Thanks, Alana. I so enjoyed this, and we'll talk to you soon.
Talk soon. Thank you for joining me today on Ditch the Struggle. You showing up here means so, so much to me. To dig deeper into the topics discussed today and to learn about my work, visit alanarosa.com. And don't forget to download your free resources while you're there. And if this episode resonated with you, please share with others who also want to ditch the struggle. Go ahead and subscribe to the podcast, leave a rating and a review, and let me know what you'd like to see more of on this podcast. And before I go, I want to leave you with my 3 favorite ways to ditch the struggle. Be your own best advocate, take baby steps for the win, and forget about a linear career path. It's overrated and you are doing just fine. See you next time.